the cold gets to you more and more. So from personal experience, if I just talk about my commute, I ride daily from Winooski, so it's only like a 15-20-minute ride, a little bit longer when the conditions are nasty. But for that, I always go into it kind of dressing so that I leave the house a little colder, because your body is going to warm up as you're exercising it. So it's key in a ride like that just to dress a little chilly. If I were to be going out for a much longer ride, like out to, let's say, Richmond or something like that, the key for something like that is layering, as you pointed out. Natural fibers generally are good. I'm a fan of them, like wool, wicks away a lot of moisture. And then, there's, of course, synthetic stuff that's available too. But, if you're generally just riding around town, I feel like you can get away with just wearing simple, like long johns and maybe a heavier pair of pants than you would the rest of the year. If it's super windy, it's important to be covered because, as we all know, wind gets to the bone pretty quick. As for how to keep like your extremities warmer, there's obviously tons of different glove options out there. We carry some at the shop from Azumi that are lobster finger style like this. The idea being with mittens or with gloves this style, if your fingers are kept next to each other, they're going to keep each other warmer. But the cool thing about something like this is it gives you the ability to be a little bit more dexterous, which is necessary on some types of bikes, to touch a shifter or be able to grab a brake easily.
Can you pass those around?
Yeah, sure. Other options that are out there, people that maybe have a longer ride or something like that, may choose to go with something like what are called bar mitts, or other, more common term too is pogies. And these are essentially a neoprene over mitten. They make them to be used on flat handlebars like this, as well as handlebars for a road bike, like a drop bar. And some people swear by them, and you can often, if the weather's not super frigid, ride with just your hands in there or just a light glove. So a benefit there is you just have, again, more dexterity, right?
I've never seen like that before.
Yeah, I kind of feel like, they've always been around, but I think with the, fat tire bikes and stuff, you see them used a bit more. Certainly if you're out for a long ride, it might not be a bad idea to bring hand warmers. People swear by them. Personally, I like to ride in mittens, so I actually picked up from Outdoor Gear Exchange some KINCO's mittens, which are just like I think it's calfskin. It's a natural, a leather of sorts, but they're soaked in something that's hydrophobic, so they don't really soak water into them. And they, my hands just stay super warm, and then they have a nice cuff. You can also use, if folks have stuff for skiing or like winter hiking, you can use that as well. Really you're just prepping for being outside when it's cold, so it's a lot, at least in shorter trips, like common stuff. In terms of more like cycling oriented winter gear, we have the pogies, which we just looked at. And then they make like shoe covers like this for if folks ride with clipless pedals where their foot is clipped in and attached to the pedal. And so we work with a company, 45 North, that goes one further, and they make a lot of different cycling boots for winter. So we see a lot of that stuff again with folks riding on fat tire bikes. But also just winter commuters too. At this point, we'll wear them.
What a great idea that is! I've never seen those either.
Yeah. Just show a hand. Do people ride on flat pedals or like not clipped in, and then clipless pedals? Sure. Yeah. So that's a good solution for staying warm in that. I'll usually in terms of layering, if you're wearing like a regular cycling shoe, you don't want to layer up a lot because you're going to cut off circulation. So it's sort of counterproductive. So it's better to insulate on the outside with something like that.
What a great idea to keep yourself dry.
Yeah.
That's my main thing. My feet get wet and I get cold.
Yeah, exactly. There's a cool trick a friend taught me. That's just because the way that the shoes work to clip in the pedals is they have a little metal plate, and you can slip a credit card in under your insole, and it keeps your insole off the metal, which also would keep you a little bit warmer. Fun little trick. But yeah, like personally, if I, again, just riding around town, I just wear Sorel boots. You know, and like if it's super inclement out there, I may wear just like rain pants over, you know, my insulated leggings and stuff. Or, you know, if it's really frigid, I have snowboard pants that I'll wear. You know, bouncing back to going out for longer rides, you can get more like performance-oriented stuff. They're, you know, for Lazumi, and again, the company 45 North I mentioned, they make like over gear, so you can kind of take it in any direction, just basic stuff you already have, or, you know, more performance-oriented. But yeah, in terms of like you're keeping your face covered in general, some folks like to ride with what's called a BALACLAVA. You know, these would go, they fit well underneath a cycling helmet or a regular winter helmet, and they keep every surface covered. You can go the route of just using a scarf, like again, commuting around town, just a scarf. You know, maybe we'll get some knit masks going for winter. Yeah, like I personally ride with a scarf in conjunction with just some old ski goggles, because for me it's like if I can keep any wind from penetrating, all the better. You know, for me, like the go-to helmet would be something like this. We carry these helmets from BERN, which is a company out of Boston, but they make a couple different lines. This is like an actual winter helmet from them, and it has ear flaps built into it, but you can also get an additional winter liner. That's MITTENS. Excuse me. It's basically an attachment that goes in, and it just covers a bit more here, so that you're able to put some goggles right up against it and just keep everything sealed from the wind.
And how much do those type of helmets run?
Let's see here. So this one's 100. I forget this one. This is another one from them that's more of like a shoulder season one. That's 70. Actually, it's called the Brentwood, but this they also make a liner for, so it's a little bit less expensive. It's not quite like the biggest difference in looking at them is the vents. Like this has less vents. The idea being that you get less airflow to cool you. But here it has some larger vents on top and in the front. So
Do you close those vents? Open, close?
These ones, you can't close them, but the liner sort of serves to close them because it basically puts a fabric barrier in there.
I meant like if you get hot, you can't open them. But I mean, open and close.
No, yeah, so you can remove like a portion of the liner to let some air pass through, but you can't like open and close them. So yeah, the other option is if folks have, you know, you could go to a ski swap. If you don't already have one, you could pick up like a ski helmet for cheap. But that's like essentially the same thing, just a little bit heavier, maybe more robust, but it works. This is basically just a lighter version of an insulated liner. If you're using a regular cycling helmet, you know, if you're going on a nice or warmer day or something.
Most of the biking helmets I've always seen always have like a peak in the back. So that those look kind of just round. So are they just as safe? Because I know normally you don't want to really, you want like a peak hit.
Yeah, so there's different helmets. There's a lot of different helmets out at this point that have gone away from that. So they make more like urban style helmets. But any helmets that you get at any bike shop have to meet Consumer Product Safety Commission guidelines. So they're all, you know, maybe the construction's different, but they're all rated to the same level. One thing, if you haven't heard about it, that's good to look for in helmets is a thing called MITTENS. And that's just a newer helmet design. It just gives you added protection. Usually they charge a bit more for them, but it's a good peace of mind. Yeah, like this one here maybe.
So what is the mix exactly?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so to explain it, to see, but there's this yellow plastic that's in there, and essentially it's designed to be a cradle within the helmet. So, God forbid you have an accident, the helmet essentially takes the brunt of the force while your head is floating sort of inside of it, where like a normal helmet would just have padding directly against you. So it just gives you a little more shock absorption in a nutshell. But yeah, they make like across cycling helmets from like the fanciest race ones to like, more like urban city style ones. They make them with mitts at this point. Yeah, in terms of like apparel related to safety, if in the winter it's dark most of the time, and so some folks used to go with gloves that are brighter so that if they're cycling and signaling while they're out there on the road, they'll be seen more by drivers. We also carry, I don't have any on the wall now, but there's one safety vest there. But we carry just like basic safety vests to put over yourselves. It's personal choice. Key thing if you're riding those just to be illuminated, whether it's with reflective vests or just lighting. The more the better, really. So from here, let's bounce into bikes and types of bikes that are good for riding. People cycle all different ways in the wintertime. Personally, I really like to ride a really basic bike. I don't like to call it a winter beater because I try and keep it healthy and running, but the simpler the better, personally, in the winter. So I ride a bike similar to this one here in the stand, which is a shop original. These are bikes that are called our 365s. So they're set up with internally geared hubs. So believe it or not, this back here has 3 different gears inside of it. It kind of looks like a Swiss watch when you open it. But the idea with a bike like this is you keep everything that could get damaged by the weather enclosed. I mean, not everything, of course, but the most important part. And then the chain is really the only thing that you're needing to lubricate and keep up on. Where if you have a bike with derailleurs, that shift the chain back and forth, you just have more maintenance ongoing, whether it's preventative or keeping up with stuff as it starts to seize. So an advantage to this is purely that. It's less exposed to the weather on the outside. Bike like this is also good in that it's set up with a nice upright handlebar. That contributes a lot to your stability as well as your comfort. This is just my opinion here, but I feel like with your body a little bit closer to itself, you stay warmer rather than being like if you're stretched out on a road bike for a long time, you're just kind of letting more air in and just spreading yourself away. You'll notice here the bike's set up with a knobby tire. All of our 365 bikes come set up with knobbies, but they're all designed to be able to take studs. In the winter, I'd recommend riding with something like this, which is just a regular mountain bike tire with some grip for traction, or going the other route and getting studded tires, much like they make for cars. They make a whole slew of sizes and types of tires. So,
Do you have a preference between doing knobby or doing studs?
What's that?
Do you have a preference between doing knobby or studs?
Yeah, again, it's like a peace of mind thing. Studs, I will say, they're not going to keep you up, but they're going to keep you from falling instantly. There's no real guarantee with them, but they do a lot to give you traction, and I find like they'll save me from just like going out. It's like it happens. You hit a patch of black ice, and a key thing there is not to do anything really, except go straight. Get across it. But yes, studs versus knobbies, pros and cons for sure. It's sometimes like you feel like you put them on and then it's dry for weeks or whatever. But you want to be ready if you do hit a patch of black ice. So
How noisy are they if it's dry for weeks?
they're not very noisy. They kind of like more than anything, I would say the pain with them is they add resistance. So it's notable. I would say I always joke with people that I feel like Superman in the springtime when I put my slick tires back on. Because yeah, they'll slow you down for a bit, but it's good resistance training, right? But yeah, they make studded tires. Like this one is generally put on, like we have a family bike that we sell here. But if families want to ride you around, they use this small one with the front wheel. And then they make them all the way up to studded fat bike tires. For most intents and purposes, for standard like hybrid bikes or mountain bikes that people are usually riding, in terms of pricing, studs, they're pricey. They'll range from like about $60 to $90 a tire. The good thing about them though is it's an investment. Like you'll have them generally for like 3 to 5 years. A lot of them will start to crack over time, but it's usually not a worry. Like I have a pair that I've run for 6 years and they're all like covered in cracks in the sidewall. The key thing is just you don't ever want them to get deformed. That's when it really comes time to change them. And like a car, you can rotate. I rotate them from year to year. I'll run the front and the rear and the rear and the front to stretch them out. They're actually, these are all tungsten carbide. So it's like if you were to get Aquapolitas or whatever tire on your car, it's the same design. Usually, the difference in price often comes down to the stud count, because studs are often the expensive part in terms of putting in just the thing. So like here we have a tire that's $50, and then right next to it, this is like 70, but it's got about 30% more studs in it. So yeah, studs are good. We mount them all for free for folks if they buy a set. And what I recommend for people, if it's like a huge, upfront cost, is you can try one and try that in the front and see how that goes. It's perfectly fine, I find, to run one up front and one regular mountain bike tire in the rear. The reason there is that's your drive tire in the back. It's just going to follow the studded front one, which does all your steering. If your steering goes out, that's where you can get into issues. So as long as you have a good planted front with the stud, it's usually okay. You may not be able to get up your hill, but yeah, questions about studs? Great. Other sort of accessories or ways to set your bike up for winter, I really recommend fenders, because warm, dry body stays that way. Once you start to get wet, as you pointed out, it can kind of go downhill. So you can get basic fenders like this, which just mount directly onto the frame. If you have a particular bike, like let's say a road bike that has, it doesn't have all the points to mount fenders like this, there are other options. So we sell different like clip-on fenders. Some people also just like the ability to take fenders on and off depending on the weather, and that's where if you get one that has a clip-on that just disconnects easily, you can just put them away when you don't want to use them. Certainly the ones that are mounted to the bike are going to give you the most coverage just because they cover most of the wheel. Yeah.
How much do the fenders run?
How much they go? They're about, the most basic is $30.
For a set or for one?
For a set, yeah. Yep. Yeah, so that's the 365 bikes, we include fenders installed on all of them. But yeah, they're pretty great. And the basic ones, in my opinion, are some of the better ones out there. The one like this is actually one tier up, but like the only real difference is this is stainless steel hardware. Where if you look at the more basic one here, this is just like painted steel. So I have a set on my bike that's like 8 years old, and this is starting to get rusty, but they still work. Another key accessory for safety and peace of mind while you're riding is just lighting. So you can get a ton of different lights. We carry some basic battery powered ones, a set of these will go for $16 or $20 for ones that are a little bit brighter. And then we have rechargeable ones here that go for about, I think, $61 for a set. But they're usually rated by lumens. So if you're shopping for different lights, that's how they speak about them. More lumens just means brighter. And typically, rechargeable ones will start at a brighter luminosity or whatever. And they're not, the batteries are good for probably hundreds of cycles. So they work out over time. Another lighting option I don't have represented here is just dynamo lighting. And what that means is there are front wheels that are made with a resistor inside of them. And so as you pedal, you're generating electricity that can power lights. So you can set up bikes with wired lighting that is just powered by the cyclist that's using it. And I have it set up on my bike and I really like it just because my lights are always there. I never have to think about if they got stolen or if, God forbid, but or if they have a charge or anything like that. It's just like I start riding, they turn on. So.
When do those helmets come with lights or light kits?
They do make some that have an accessory that can go into the back, which we can get to. Yeah, I have a friend who has one from another company that actually has turn signals. Yeah, I forget the name of it, but they have a little handlebar mount, and you can press it for which way you're turning. So this bike, the reason I pulled it up here is because it's pretty basic. This is a bike from 1984. So the gears on it, there's only 18. Again, what I said in the beginning is often the simpler the better in the winter. So it makes it a good candidate for winter use. Any bike with derailleurs kind of gets the same treatment in general. So the most important thing to do is keep it clean and well lubricated. In terms of where, how, and how frequently to lubricate, it's going to be different, of course, with each rider, depending on where they're going and all that. But general practice, I would say you're lubing your chain. That's the main thing, probably once a week in the winter. Good chain lube to use in wintertime is something that's set up for wet conditions. Chain lubes are often marketed to be for dry or wet. We carry some here at the shop from Dumont-Tech that it's generally like any wet lube you get, what you're looking for is that it's more viscous, just thicker, because you're exposing it to the elements all the time. Thicker lubes are going to stay on chains longer, where a dry lube will be thinner and it'll work well, but it's going to be flushed off your chain all the time. So I usually tell people like once a week, but really it's about looking and listening. Like your chain will tell you if it needs oil. I mean, hopefully you don't get that far along, but just keep an eye on it. Chains will generally get rusty no matter what, no matter how diligent you are about lubricating them. If you want to try and get away from super rusty chains, there are options out there. Different companies make like chains with rust inhibitors on them. Some companies will make stainless chains as well. I kind of just like embrace it. It's gonna get rusty. It's okay. Just keep it moving and keep it oiled. So, in terms of like cleaning a chain in between lubing it or winter use, I think if you don't over oil the chain and you wipe it down after you oil it, you shouldn't really have to do too much cleaning in between. Again, it's going to be different for everyone, but things that'll tell you that you do need to clean it are if you have a lot of buildup of residue on your gears in the back here. A good way to deal with that is they make an actual like gear brush for it, but at home if you have like a paint roller scraper or even like an old butter knife, anything like that that can get in between and clean these out will help you. You can also use, like a little bit surgically, you can use a degreaser citrus-based degreaser, or even from the supermarket, you can get like a simple green. That's a really basic bio degreaser. Like personally, I just kind of let it be in the winter, keep gunk from building up and keep it oiled, and then worry about really degreasing it in the spring. That's a chain really in a nutshell.
What about salt? Like salt getting on the bike? Do you recommend like spraying the bike down with water or?
I don't. It's another thing I'd let be, because oftentimes if you're hosing a bike, you're diluting that salt and kind of moving it all over. You know, you can move it into linkages and pivots and stuff like that. So I'd rather kind of like be preventative with keeping it lubricated and just like let the salt be on it. Certainly, rust is a consideration with the frame, so you want to be cognizant of that. If you see surface spots, I've even put like nail polish or a little bit of clear coat over them just to keep them from rusting out more. And this frame here is made of steel. A lot of bikes are, but of course there's aluminum and carbon, things like that. With steel bikes, you do run the risk of rust on the inside, and they do make a product. This one is just steel frame protector. It's a rust inhibitor that you can spray inside. It's sort of like, if you've heard of an oil undercoat on a vehicle. It's essentially doing the same thing to a steel bicycle inside of the frame. It's kind of a labor, to do it, but you pull a couple things out and spray this in, basically shake it around and then cross your fingers that it did the trick. I'll usually do that if somebody requests it, but oftentimes if you're not storing your bike in like a super wet area and it's not out in the weather all the time, a steel frame without that stuff will probably last you like 10 or 15 years. So just like, not under a drip spout or something. Any more questions like on the chain or like cleaning?
So when you clean the chain, you just use a dry cloth and then oil or then grease.
Yeah, one
Another
one kind of tool I forgot to mention is I use just a metal brush at home. So I'll usually set my bike so that it's like in the chain is run right in the middle. So unless I can do that there, and I'll just like hold the brush here and just kind of. Do folks have, not common, but anybody have a work stand at home? Alright, so we'll talk about how to do it in the work stand and then off the work stand. But in terms of cleaning, you could use a rag. I'd start with a brush, just drag it along. I mentioned there's a gear brush available too from a couple different companies, but you can kind of go either way with it. And you can really clean the chain, you can clean the sprockets. And again, you're just trying to get like the majority of the gunk off because you've got the rest of the winter ahead of you. And you can clean off these jockey wheels here too. Those are just a part on the derailleur where gunk can build up. So cleaning, we've got that done. In terms of oiling on the stand, the reason I put the chain here in the middle is then I can actually this is one foot going off the ground. In the stand, you can just sit here, hold our drip lube right here on top. And so again, imagination's here, but dripping oil just onto each and every link. And then while the bike's in the stand, after you've covered it with basically just a light coating of oil on every link, I like to go ahead and then shift it through each of the gears, just so that I'm putting a little bit onto each of them. I'll do that up front as well. Once I've done that, I get back to where I started. I'll just hold the rag here and just let the rag take off any excess that remains. If you don't have a stand, which a lot of folks don't, you can simply lean your bike up against like a door or the end of a wall or something. And this is where I would put it right in that middle here, so the chain is running as straight as it can. Because you can't pedal forward when it's on the ground, only backwards. You don't want it to jam. So it would really be the same routine here. I would be using my nice wet lube for winter, dripping it on right here. You know, if you were feeling real giddy, you could maybe go ride around the block and shift it through your gears. If not, it's not a huge deal. The oil will spread out over time, but you would just wipe any excess off. It's a good idea to wipe excess off, but you can kind of like try it out in the winter. Just observe how quickly the lube runs out of there. Like sometimes I'll just put it on and kind of like leave it. You know, I won't really use it, put a ton on, but I'll just put it there and let it be. Just keep an eye. In terms of other places that we want to be paying line to in the winter, is really anything that is pivoting or wants to pivot on the bike. So just to run through, are the brakes, kind of irrespective of what kind of brake you have, they're always going to be pivoting. So it'll be different on every bike, but a really good way to learn about it is just stand next to your bike, squeeze your brake, and look what's moving and what's not. It's kind of that simple. The lube that you want to use on stuff like this can be different because it's more like, what do you call it, like more particular or like tighter tolerances. So what I would use in lubricating brakes would be a lube called Tri-Flow. It's lighter, so it can get in and penetrate spots that are a little tighter. And on a brake like this, do folks have like classic rim style brakes in general, or like, so I guess rim brakes? One of each. Okay. So, and then disc brakes. Cool. So yeah, sorry to bounce around a little here, but just so folks are aware, disc brakes are pretty solid. they're good in all conditions, and then they prevent wear on rims. Rim brakes will work just fine. They're just like a little bit, they're not quite as strong to start, and then they're a little bit more susceptible to underperforming because of moisture and ice. Just because, you know, if it gets coated there, that can be tricky. Disc brakes, I will say, in terms of oiling, you don't really want to do it that much. I'm talking more here, I guess, about like a mechanical brake, where a lot of disc brakes are hydraulic. Are folks aware of hydraulic versus mechanical? Sure. So hydraulic brakes, they're operated with fluid, so they're a totally closed system, and basically as someone squeezes the brake, much like in a car, the brake pedal, it pushes hydraulic fluid, and that's what makes the brakes engage. Another type of disc brake, or rim brake, they're both called mechanical, and so they're just moving by way of cable. If you're working with mechanical brakes, either for discs or for rims, it's a good idea to keep your cables lubricated. You know, oil and water, they don't like each other, and that's a good thing. So if we keep oil or grease in these sections of housing, it'll prevent water from getting in there and freezing, which can certainly happen. So on mechanicals, we're going to lubricate these frequently. Here at the shop, we'll usually grease the cables before we sell a bike, like when we're fixing it up. But at home, you can just put oil on it. It would be the Tri-Flow, that's the light oil that I mentioned. That works really well on cables. If you're not kind of pulling them apart, it'll still get in there and oil them. In terms of another thing to keep an eye on just while we're on brakes is pads go a lot quicker in the winter, just because there's more crud getting into them. You know, on the rim brake, this would be the pad right here. It's what's actually making contact with the rim and slowing you down. They just get debris in them often, more salt, more sand on the roads, things like that. Disc brakes, they also fall victim to it, right? They don't get as much debris on them, but people tend to brake a bit more in the winter, so it's just a good idea, regardless of what brakes you have, keep an eye on the pads. Sort of telltale signs of your brake pads getting worn down. You can hear, if it's really bad, you can hear noise that, like on a rim brake, it'll sound like scraping, and that can be if debris has gotten into the pads. On disc brakes, you can hear when pads start to go. It's like if people have vehicles, if you've ever had brake pads on a car go too long, it sounds like metal on metal. Same thing happens on bikes. What we want to do to prevent getting that far is just keep an eye on brake pad wear through the winter, really year round. But what you're doing to keep an eye on it is brake pads on rim brakes will often have a small line on them, which acts as a wear line. So it'll tell you when to change them or to bring them into a shop to get them changed. Disc brakes, they're a little bit trickier, but basically you can like hold up the wheel to light and look down into the brake caliper, which is right here. Cool. Questions about brakes?
The difference between grease and oil,
Sure.
where does grease go, what's a little bit?
Yeah, so grease generally is used on bearing systems on the bike, and what grease is just super viscous petroleum product. So this is a tube of waterproof grease right here, and where this would go on the bike is in the wheel bearings, inside this bottom bracket here, inside the wheel bearing up front, and in this headset. It's basically anything that is fully rotating that does it a lot of the time. Grease basically is just, it's kind of like more robust, it has more staying power, where oil, it'll go away and need to be sort of recycled. So usually grease is going on at the shop, unless you're like getting really into it and tearing your bike apart. The other place you will find grease though on brakes here is where these arms pivot. And again, this is like if you're kind of getting into it at home and pulling this stuff off here, like pulling these brake arms off, grease actually goes on the posts that's where the brakes actually bolt onto the bike. So basically it goes anywhere that's like enclosed that you're not going to be able to get oil into frequently because it'll last longer. In terms of oil, the other places we do want to put it in the winter and generally year round is anything that's like just pivoting kind of more minor rather than rotating. And so again, like I said on the brakes, a good way to get familiar with that is just to shift your bike. It's tricky without a stand to do it, but you might find a way to hang it. You can hang a bike by its saddle, and then you can articulate these things just to look at them. But you can even, if your bike's on the ground, you can really just sit there and kind of push it. It's not really going to hurt anything to just push these things back and forth. But what I'm looking at when I do this is where the pivot's happening. And then, again, my favorite tri-flow comes really in handy here. As we see this thing pivot, the rear derailleur here, we can see this spots where it's doing so. And we're just going to drip really light oil into those spots. And again, in the winter, I may just put it on and not do a thing. I'll just leave it there because it's going to protect from more salt and junk getting in. Like let's say, you squirt a little bit too much on, you can definitely wipe it off. But oiling on the pivot points here, where this pivots right here, we would oil on both sides there, and then oil these jockey wheels that we knocked off 5 minutes ago with our metal brush, right? If we go to the front derailleur, it's the same thing. We're just going to move the derailleur and see where it's moving. And I would just go through and each of these points just drip oil onto. And here it doesn't have to be a ton, because I would say in terms of frequency, you're probably doing this like every second time you're lubing your chain. So let's say like every 2 weeks. Again, like experiment with it a little bit and just see what happens, but you don't have to do this as much as you have to do your chain. The other thing to hit on derailleurs and brakes for that matter are the small screws on them. These screws on the derailleur are used to adjust it, and they're really small so they can easily get seized into place. So to prevent that from happening while you're back there, just drip some oil. Basically, any cable on the bike that is exposed like this, you can find where it goes into what's called the housing. And you can, I like to just gravity feed the oil into it. If you do want to go a step further, a lot of brakes have it's called a quick release. And so if you can find the quick release on your brake. If folks want to check bikes out after too, I'm happy to look for one that may be similar to yours. But this one, the quick release for this brake is right here. And I'll be able to pull this little cable out. And what happens when I do that is this cable goes slack. And so I may do this once a month or something. But when I slacken the cable like that, I'm then able to take the cable housing out, and I can inspect it and see how the inner cable looks there. I mean, it should look good, it's on our sales floor, but, but this looks pretty good right now. What I might encounter here, if I've been riding the heck out of this in the winter, is rust or oxidation building up on it. And to cure that, you can use some steel wool, or if folks have Scotch-Brite pad, anything abrasive. You just want to get a shine back on that. And then if I went this far, I may use the heavier oil, like the wet lube, and just drip it and then follow my way back here. And you know, the goal here is just getting something in there to keep moisture from being able to get back in. You can do the same on gears, and I'll show you how in just a sec. But if you want to keep the cables lubricated well, you can often do the same thing. So, shifting in a nutshell, our cable pulls and articulates the derailleur side to side. So at different points, the cable is tighter and looser. So what I like to do if I don't have tools to pull my cables apart, is I'm going to make the cable as tight as possible, which in the back is in the smallest gear there. And then if you watch, I'll go to the shifter and just dump all the gears. What that does is creates a ton of slack in my cable, which I can then, much like I did on the brake, disconnect it. There are some bikes where you can't do this, but a lot of them are made to be able to pull the cable out. But yeah, once I've done that, I'm going to go through the same routine. Where the cable is usually covered, I'll just look at it, and if it's got gunk built up, I'll clean that off, and then I'll drip oil back in here. Like I said, this is something you don't have to do that often. It's maybe once a month. Or if you notice like things that might tell you to do this, or if you notice that your shifting is getting sluggish, like your gears aren't dropping as they should, or if your brakes are getting harder and harder to squeeze. Or like, let's say that the pads are not returning or going away from the rim. Those are often ailments from this stuff being corroded or gritty. Yeah, again, here I might use the wet oil if I went this far. So, yeah, if you want to periodically, maybe once a year, you can flip your bike over and drip some oil into these bearings here. It's called our headset. And that's something you don't really have to do unless it's giving you an issue. But one thing I highly recommend, especially if your bike spends most of its time outside, is keep up on pulling your seat out every once in a while. Because people come in more often than they'd like to admit to get these cut out because they've rusted into the frame. This may be more information than we need, but fun science fact is seat posts which are often made of aluminum in steel frames will actually chemically bond if water gets in between them. It's I forget what it's called exactly. It's like an isotopic swap or something. But it makes these things like totally married, like you can't get them out. So probably like once every 2 months or thereabouts, you just want to take your seat post out, and this is where grease, like the heavier stuff, comes in handy because it'll stay a long time. So we can spread grease either on the post and put it in, or in the seat tube right there. And then basically, this is, there's excess on there, but I'd rather have too much than too little. But greasing is a good idea. More questions on lubricating or maintenance? Or couple other things that just came to mind are, one thing to always pay attention to in winter is your tire pressure. Truly all year round, but tire pressure is affected by cold, obviously, so as it gets colder, tires are getting softer. So especially if you're running studs or knobby tires, it's good to keep your tires at like a good riding pressure. What's a good riding pressure? Tires will often have a recommended range written on the side. It's usually written in PSI, pounds per square inch, or bar. You can usually find both. Generally, I tell folks in the winter to run either to the lower end of what they recommend, or sometimes you can go even lower than the lower end. But generally, I guess to a point, less pressure will give you more traction because your tire is just squatting a little bit more and like making more contact with the ground. But yeah, just like check it. Really, it's good to check it year round. I just like to tell people, once 3 of my coworkers, we all had the same exact tires, and we went out with a really precise digital gauge and checked all of our tires, and they were like, the furthest point was like 35 pounds. Like, it might be a 60 PSI tire, and somebody had theirs at 20 and somebody else at 60, because we all just like ride to work and never think about it. But yeah, it improves your fuel economy if you keep your tires paired up well.
In other seasons, what's a good like level to keep it at?
Yeah, sure. So like, if I was riding something like either of these tires, which are like mountain bike oriented, I would run them at probably the max recommended if I'm just riding around town. Sort of how it's going to work is the higher the pressure, generally, the like less comfortable you'll get. So if you're at the max, it could feel rock hard. So if you air it down a little, it gives you a little pneumatic suspension, So you can kind of play around with it on your bike and find the sweet spot, but it's definitely fun if you let them go for a while and air your tires up. Again, you feel like Superman. You can fly. Another question folks often ask is like where to store the bike in the winter. And I'm a firm believer that keeping it as close to the temperature you're normally riding in is best. I really don't, bringing a bike inside and out all the time, it kind of puts it into a freeze-thaw cycle. So, just from moisture condensing on it all the way to like if you've got a lot of snow built up on it and bring it into a heated space, all of that as it melts gets into all the nooks and crannies that we want to keep oiled. So if you have a safe place that's not like, getting rained on or getting dripped on, that you can keep the bike outside or an ambient temperature, it's better. Some folks that have e-bikes ask about, do anybody have e-bikes? Okay. Be quick about it, but yeah, for e-bikes, usually just recommend that folks bring their batteries inside to a heated place if they're using them year round, because batteries just die super quick in the cold. Yeah, so the kind of like last thing I want to talk about, and then we can just chit chat and talk about whatever, is just about riding, like good riding tips in the wintertime. The biggest thing if it's inclement is to be anticipating more than normal, because it takes more time to slow down, right? Or to speed up to get out of the way. So just trying to be a little more like cognizant, and like if I know I need to have a stop coming up, I may start braking a little bit sooner than I would in drier times of the year. I think the biggest thing I've learned over the years with ice is to try and train yourself not to react. If you get onto ice, the best thing you can do is just let the bike keep rolling. Kind of a natural thing is for people to want to hit the brakes or like jump off or something like that, but that can be more risky than just like letting the bike go, because it's physics. It wants to go where it wants to go, so just gotta kind of let it, I guess. I think riding in the winter, if you are like, so a lot of folks are like getting into commuting. Do people ride in the road often, or yeah, okay, bike path, some, right? Yeah, so a good mix. Yeah, I think in the winter on the road, an important thing, as tough as it is sometimes, is to take the lane, or at least make yourself present in it in really inclement weather. Because if you stay over in the shoulder, A, you're not as likely to be seen, but B, the conditions under your tire can be pretty mixed. And so, you know, you may just pull out and get into that first tire track as it makes sense, so that you have a little bit more like clear path of travel. Certainly you can play it by ear, or you know, play it by what feels comfortable to you, but sometimes you're better seen doing that, you know. Something I always like to use hand signals when I'm out riding, well, like depending on no matter what time of year it is, I should say. So, you know, just signal your intentions. So left, right, and stop. You know, I think you maybe are supposed to do it by law. Do it with comfort. If you don't feel comfortable pulling your arm off, just take the turn. But yeah. Oh, one pretty random other tangent here is another kind of bike option that I didn't throw out there. We really only looked at internally geared and bikes with derailleurs on them. But another route that people will go is riding bikes that are single speed in the winter. Again, this is getting at simplicity. So you can run a single speed that allows you to coast. You know, you just stop pedaling and it keeps rolling. You can ride one that has a foot brake built into it, like this bike over here. So it has like a bike you would have had as a little kid, where you pedal backwards, the brake is applied. Or you can ride what's called a fixed gear bike. Fixed gear bikes are set up so that if the bike is moving, the pedals will be moving. What's cool about those, particularly in the winter, is that you get a direct kind of transmission. So you can slow yourself down by holding back against your pedals, which gives you a lot of control. And so some people like to ride like that year round, and it has its benefits in the winter. It's definitely an acquired taste though, because if you're moving, your legs are moving no matter what. So
how do you handle turns when it's snowing and you don't know there's ice? That's my worst fall, is when I'm turning and I'm not aware there's a lot of ice.
yeah.
Do you do really gentle turning, or it's scary on the side of the road when there's a lot of snow and you don't know what's under there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would say as gentle as you can, and so that goes for like braking, accelerating, and turning. Like all of those things, I'd maybe try and slow down my reaction time a little bit more than in other times of year. So yeah, if you can pick your lines well, so that you're able to make them the most gradual, that's going to be to your benefit for sure. And again, like I said, as much as you can plan in advance for turns and stuff like that, and just be aware of what's around, that's going to help you stay upright.